있습니다. So today's message is entitled One Who Leaves Behind. One Who Leaves Behind. And especially as we celebrate Father's Day today, this is a mindset that we really do need to have. 특별히 오늘 아버지 날인데요. 이런 생각이 있어야 됩니다. 내가 뭐를 다음 세대를 위해서 뭐를 남길까 잘 생각하셔야 됩니다. We really need to think when it comes to the next generation. I know some of you guys might be single or some of you guys are young and but the thing is, we need to really think about what do I plan to leave behind here on this earth? And this is something that is very important because so many people live very purposeless or very zombie-like lives. They are busy all the time, but don't know what they're living for. 많은 사람들 되게 바쁜 생활을 살고 계십니다. 그러나 그 바쁨 안에서 생각이 없어집니다. 그냥 완전 로봇처럼 이렇게 행동하고 있습니다. 그러나 우리 오늘 본문 생각하시면서요. 진짜 뭐를 중요한 것을 찾아야 됩니다. Through today's passage, we have to really look at what is really important here today. Today is a very special day. It's not just Father's Day, but it's another day. 오늘 되게 특별한 날입니다. 아버지 날만 아니고요. 미국에서는 또 다른 날입니다. What is it? Does anybody know? Huh? Yes, Juneteenth. 그래서 오늘 Juneteenth라고 날입니다. So today is Juneteenth or June 19th, but it's kind of mushed together, so it turns into June 19th. 미국에서 이제 노예 있을 때요. 그 해방선은 아브라함 이제 링컨 대통령 통해서 이거 사인했습니다. 그러나 그 해방선언은 1월 1일 1863년에 passed 되었습니다. So the Emancipation Proclamation was signed beforehand by Abraham Lincoln to free the slaves during this time. But it was not until January 1st, 1863 that it was put into place. However, the army who was to enforce this had to go state by state, bit by bit to be able to share this news because there was no telephones, there was no internet during this time. So everything was done by horse or by by walking or running or whatnot. And especially with the army that had to move to be able to enforce this, it took a while. But Texas was on the lowest part of the United States. And they didn't hear the news until June 19th, 1865. 이런 좋은 소식이 1월 1일 1863년에 이렇게 됐지만 그 2년 지나서 텍사스에서 6월 19일 1865년에 그 좋은 소식을 받았습니다. 그래서 2년 동안 계속 노예로 살고 계셨습니다. So for over 2 years, these slaves that were in the South, in Texas, lived as slaves for over 2 years, even though this was proclaimed at the very beginning of the year, 2 years before. That's amazing. How can this happen, right? There's no internet, there's no telephones to get this news faster. And for those who would have known, they could have enjoyed this blessing a lot sooner. But so many of us in a very similar state live in that type of state where we are being dragged along. 오늘 상태 보시면요, 되게 비슷합니다. 그리스도 안에서 이 해방을 받았습니다. 그러나 질질 끌려는 힘든 일, 스트레스, 나쁜 상황 계속 질질 끌려가고 있습니다. So many people are just stuck being dragged by bad circumstances, horrible situations, stress, and just the different things that come about during your regular week. And we have no choice without Christ. 그리스도 없이 성태의 여지가 없습니다. We become people-centered, material-centered, and trend-centered. And so many people live this way. If it's not Christ, then you have no choice but to be people-centered. What people say dictates how you live. What you have dictates how you live. What the culture says is trending is how you end up living. And what ends up happening is we get into this survival mode. 내가 어떻게 살아남아야지 이런 생각으로 많은 사람들 살고 계십니다. 그러나 살아남는 생각으로 빠지면 안 되고요. 어떻게 살릴 수 있는 생각으로 바뀌어야 됩니다. We can't stay stuck thinking, I just need to survive. We really need to start thinking, how can I bring alive, right? How can I truly revive the parts of my life that are dead? How can I revive the people that are around me that are dying, that are with no answers? People that are stuck in the same pattern of being people-centered, materialistic, right? Or trend-centered. Why do we need to find these answers? Because there is a generation behind you that need them as well as you. 우리만 필요 있는 답이 아니고요. 또 다음 세대도 생각하시면요. 되게 중요한 답을 받아야 됩니다. 그래서 다음 세대 생각하시면요. 이런 전쟁입니다. So when we think about the next generation, it really is a war between freedom and enslavement. Satan wants us to be enslaved to the idols of this world. 사단은 진짜 이 세상의 우상들 이렇게 밑에를 이렇게 있게 만들려고 그럽니다. 그러나 그리스도 안에서만 이런 해방, 이런 자유를 얻을 수 있습니다. When we look at Christ, He has made the way for us to be free, not for us to remain enslaved to the idols of this world. And God, He is calling you and I to be the next leadership, right? And when we talk about leadership, we think about, oh man, there's a lot of responsibilities. I don't want to do more work on top of the work that I'm already doing. 진짜 지도력 이렇게 생각하시면요, 많은 사람들 되게 겁냅니다. 이렇게 어떻게 지도자 되면은 막 일이 많이 생길 거다 이렇게 그렇게 생각밖에 못 합니다. 그러나 그것보다 더 큰 목표를 가져야 됩니다. 진짜 이 문화를 어떻게 변화시킬 수 있을까요? 또 교회 가는 길을 어떻게 변화시킬 수 있을까요? 이 복음 있는 지도자가 필요가 있습니다. How can we change the direction that the church is going today? I know leadership can be scary, but that's the thing. Leadership is where change can begin. Especially those who have children, we have to be that change for our next generation. Because if things remain the same, it's going to be the same scars, the same problems, and the same answers, where we just are stuck in our bubble. 오늘 세대 보시면요, 교회가 변화가 돼야 됩니다. 복음 변화되는 건 아니고요. 진짜 우리의 오늘 현대교회를 보시면요, 어떻게 이 세상을, 이 복음을 나눌 수 있는지, 전달할 수 있는 방법을 바뀌어야 됩니다. 그래서 우리 이 복음 있는 지도자가 필요가 있습니다. 그래야지 우리 세대에 받는 상처들, 문제들, 그거를 똑같이 가면 안 되잖아요. 그거를 다 초월해서 진짜 뛰어넘어가야 됩니다. 주님 은혜 안에서. 그래서 그 말씀 붙잡고 기도하는 것이 되게 중요합니다. It's so important for us then to hold on to God's word. And as we hold on to God's word to pray, because things can't remain the same. If things are the same, then we're going to get very disappointed because we won't change and the world itself won't change either. And especially the world that is dying needs answers. 이 죽어가는 세상을 답이 필요 있는데요. 교회에서 나와야 됩니다. 그러나 우리가 똑같은 행동, 똑같은 은혜 이렇게 가시면요. 세상도 답이 안 나오고요. 우리 개인으로는 답을 생길 수 있습니다. 그러나 하나님 마음은 온 세상, 단민족을 살리는 목표 가지고 그런 목표 가져야 됩니다. God's heart is not just for us to be blessed. We can be blessed. We can receive answers on our own. But that's not God's heart. God's heart is for the world, to reach all nations with this gospel of Jesus Christ. 오늘 본문 말씀 보시면요, 이 기념되는 situation이 나옵니다. So when we look at today's passage, we see this action of building a memorial, where Joshua was crossing over the Jordan River. And for those who are part of our Wednesday Bible study, we went over this. But as they crossed over, they took 12 large stones from the middle of the Jordan and built this memorial. And those who would look over it, and the next generation that would ask, what is this for? What would happen? The father's generation would say, this is how the Lord helped us and saved us from Egypt all the way into the promised land. 이 요단강을 이렇게 넘어가실 때 이 큰 반석, 바위들 이렇게 12개 주워왔습니다. 가지고 그걸 큰 바위들 이렇게 모아서 이 기념으로 이렇게 크게 만들었습니다. 가지고 다음 세대를 아비한테 이거 뭐예요? 물어볼 때 그렇게 설명합니다. 진짜 애굽부터 이 약속된 땅까지 하나님을 우리 지켰다. 이 하나님을 기억하라. 그런 기념이 됩니다. 우리도 마찬가지 하나님을 해주신 응답을 기억해야 됩니다. We need to remember what the Lord has done for us and build that memorial in our lives. How do we do that? Through recording it, right? Through our notes, through just remembering the answers that God has given us. Record it somewhere, whether it be in writing, whether it be in, video or whatnot. Record it somewhere where you remember what God has done for you. And it becomes a masterpiece, not just for you, but it becomes a masterpiece to help others, to equip others. 이렇게 기록하는 것을 다 모아시면요, 진짜 도움이 되는 작품을 됩니다. 이 다음 세대를 살릴 수 있는 작품. 이것을 남겨야 됩니다. This is what we have to leave behind. A memorial that leads to God. A memorial that restores the gospel. A memorial that leads to good news. 이 기념적 가지고 좋은 소식을 인도하는 것으로 됩니다. 귀한 작품이 됩니다. 되게 웃긴 거는요, 돌이잖아요. 진짜 돌 가지고도 하나님을 작품으로 만들 수 있습니다. 우리 삶에 보셔도 아무것도 없게 생기지만 그거 가지고 주님의 손을 놓으시면요, 되게 귀한 작품으로 됩니다. Even though, it's kind of funny that God uses stones, right? to be this memorial, this masterpiece. And what we have might not look like much, but when we place it in God's hands, He can make that into a masterpiece that can impact the next generation. But we need to remember, because it's all connected to what Christ has done. It's connected to God. That our lives, that our problems become something that is beautiful in His hands. For He is the creator, right? He is the potter that molds us and shapes us through the good and through the bad. 이런 기념 가지고 복음을 전달할 수 있습니다. It's about relaying the gospel with the memorial that God has placed in our lives. And it begins with this, having the heart of the Father, 하나님 아버지의 마음을 가져야 됩니다. Today is Father's Day, and not all families have great fathers. However, fathers have a very significant role in the family. 오늘 아버지 날인데요. 모든 가정에 좋은 아버지는 없습니다. 그러나 그 아버지의 임팩트가 되게 큽니다. 나쁜 점으로 클 수도 있고요. 좋은 점으로 클 수도 있습니다. It's interesting how God placed the father in the family. And you can see it within your own family, how much impact the father role has over the family, either in a bad way or in a good way. And for those who are future fathers or those who are currently fathers, you have that type of impact. And that's something that we have to be aware of and really take seriously, because you are part of shaping the future generation. 그런 큰 responsibility가 있습니다. 진짜 아버지 되는 사람, 또 될 사람, 되게 큰 그 responsibility가 있습니다. 그 때문에 이 복음을 이해 잘 해야 됩니다. We need to understand the gospel, whether father or not. We need to understand the gospel. We need to know what we're talking about. 우리 복음을 잘 몰라시면요, 설명도 못하시면요, 전달 못하시면요, 이거가 더 큰 빨리 배워야 되는 것입니다. 그렇게 돼야지 우리 삶을 통해서 플랫폼이 생깁니다. It's when we start to understand the gospel that our lives become a platform for good news to be relayed to our field, to our family, to our workplace. If we don't really understand the gospel, if I asked you, can you please tell me about the gospel? And your answer is, or your answer is, there's a lot to explain. If you don't know the core of the gospel, this is where we need to start. And this is something that we go through our church a lot. Maybe it's gone over your head so many times, but it begins with knowing that Jesus, He came as the Christ, the Messiah. And this is something that we have to remember, that He resolved this fundamental problem. That once we were separated, stuck in sin and under Satan, but Jesus Christ resolved this fundamental problem. 이 복음을 제대로 알아야 됩니다. 사람들 이 복음을 설명해 주세요 하실 때 어떻게 대답할까요? 이 복음을 잘 아셔야 됩니다. 우리 교회 통해서 많은 말씀 통해서 항상 예수는 그리스도를 고백하시잖아요. 이 근본 문제, 하나님의 떠남, 죄, 사단, 그리스도 안에서만 해결합니다. 이 복음을 제대로 이해하시면요, 우리 삶을 통해서 이 좋은 소식의 플랫폼이 됩니다. Next, we need to see eye to eye with the people that we're talking to. God is calling us to be the watchmen. of this watchtower, right? What does that mean? We need to, for those who are watchmen on the watchtower, there were two things that they did. They either welcomed people into the town or they warned people of imminent danger, right? In order to do that, what do you have to do? You need to communicate very well, right? To get the message across as clearly as possible. And that's what we are called to do as well. Understanding who we're talking to and getting that information or being able to relay the information in the best way possible. 우리 삶의 현장에서 눈이 맞아야 됩니다. 이 망대에 서 있는 파수꾼 생각하시면요, 빨리빨리 무슨 무슨 데인저가 있으면요, 빨리빨리 이렇게 메시지를 전달해야 됩니다. 그래서 간단하게 쉽게 알아들게 이렇게 메시지를 선포합니다. 우리도 마찬가지 이런 마음을 가져야 됩니다. 이 복음 메시지를 어떻게 잘 소화할 수 있는지 잘 생각하시고요. 또 무슨 위기 오시면은 빨리 전달하시고요. 좋은 소식 있으면요, 어느 도시 들어오면요, 이 파수꾼들도 인사도 합니다. 웰컴합니다. 그런 마음 가져야 됩니다. Next, we need to have the right identity, right? Where God, He is calling us as His children. He's calling us so that we can stand as witnesses of this gospel, where we understand what He is doing, where Joshua and company, in verse 24, it says, so that all the peoples of the earth may know that the hand of the Lord is mighty and that you may fear the Lord your God forever. 24절 보시면요, 그럽니다. 우리 신분은 정복자입니다. Our identity is as conquerors, not conquerors of nations, but conquerors of what Satan has built up amongst the nations. 그냥 무슨 나라의 정복자 아니고요. 진짜 영적으로 사단의 행동을 이렇게 이길 수 있는 정복자로 부르습니다. 이런 신분 가지고요, 우리 가정 위에서 싸우세요. 전쟁하세요. 마귀 장난을 전쟁하세요. 우리 산업 생각하면서요, 업을 생각하면서요, 기도하세요. We need to pray with this identity as a conqueror, breaking down what Satan has built up in our families, that they no longer fall to the lies of Satan, that our field, the places that we're working, don't continue in the same patterns. Yesterday, I was near the mall in Tyson's Corner Mall. There was a shooting there. By God's grace, we missed it. But yeah, we were there, and I'm just like, wow, this is really crazy that this is happening, so often. But thankfully, it wasn't, someone that was after everybody, but someone that was after someone in particular. It seemed like, but nevertheless, our field is hurting, and they need healing, and we need to be that source of good news. 어제 타이슨스 코너 몰 갔는데요. 거기 누굴 총 쐈어요. 그러나 다행히 우리 그때는 없었고요. 가니까 완전 다 닫았습니다. 가지고 못 들어갔어요. 그런 사건 생각하면서요, 진짜 우리 삶의 현장이 많이 아프고 있습니다. 많은 사람들 상처받고 어떻게 해결 못하니까 이런 진짜 웃기는 또 진짜 나쁜 행동을 하고 있습니다. 그러나 기독교인에서 하느님 자녀에서 우리 주변에 있는 사람들 위해서 기도해야 됩니다. 진짜 이 영적 전쟁을 싸워야 됩니다. We need to fight the spiritual battle because the field that we are in really is in need of healing. And we can't do that by ourselves. We can't be like, be better. You can try to say that and see how that works, but we need to be more than just that. We can't just be words. We have to be people that interact, people that pray, people that can share the good news with those who are struggling. And the conclusion here today is this. Today, you might be one who remains, right? And that's where we need to start. We need to remain in the gospel. And not only today, but those who will remain, and then those who are remaining. So the idea here is that we need to not only receive the gospel and be like, oh, I received grace today on Sunday. We need to continue that grace into Monday and continuously for the rest of our lives, those who will be remaining. Because only then can we be those who will leave behind, right? 우리 시작은 남은 자지만 복음 안에서 남겨야 있어야 됩니다. 그러나 남는 자로 되어야 됩니다. 또 남을 자로 되어야 됩니다. 계속 지속되어야 됩니다. 오늘 주일 예배라고 여기만 은혜 받고 월요일 날 다 잊어버리면 안 됩니다. 계속 지속을 되어야 됩니다. 이번 주만 아니고요. 우리 온 삶에 생각하시면서요. 진짜 남을 자로 되면서 남길 자로 됩니다. 우리 삶을 보시면서요. 진짜 뭐를 남길까를 잘 생각하세요. When we look at our lives today, think very carefully. What do you plan to leave behind? If you're just thinking, oh, I'll just leave behind some money for my loved ones, that can only do so much. It's helpful, don't get me wrong, but what the human soul needs is more than money, more than materialistic things. It's more than just an experience, but a relationship. 우리 인간에서 진짜 이 물질만 살고 계시면 안 됩니다. 우리 영혼이 이 물질 가지고 안 살아납니다. 이 뜨거움이 없습니다. 물질 가지고만. 뭐 뜨거움 생길 수 있지만 금방 식어집니다. 진짜 필요 있는 것은 하나님 안에서 찾을 수 있습니다. 이 보고 말씀 가지고 진짜 필요 있는 남길 것을 찾으세요. 나의 가정을 축복할 수 있는 것, 나의 교회를 축복할 수 있는 것, 나의 삶의 현장을 축복할 수 있는 것, 그거를 기도하면서요. 말씀 붙잡고 성령 인도 받으면서요. 찾으세요. Let's really find God's plan, God's this masterpiece that He's preparing through your life, that you would be a blessing to your family, right? Finding what you can leave behind for your family, thinking of what to leave behind for your field, thinking about what to leave behind when it comes to your workplace. Because all these, and when it comes to our church, what will you leave behind? What are you building, right? That will last forever, that will last beyond yourself, right? Just like they built this memorial, what will God leave in your life that you can point people back to Jesus? 무슨 기념 가질 것입니까? 그 기념 통해서 다시 그리스도를 인도할 수 있는 기념을 만들기 위해 진짜 축원합니다. I really bless you that you can be people that can build these memorials in your lives to point people to Jesus as they see your lives as a living witness. So holding on to